Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome back to The Explainer. So today, we're unpacking a really fascinating new scoping review published in the Saimsara journal, and honestly, it totally redefines how we should think about medical regulation. To start, I want you to picture a woman. Let's say she's a brilliant scientist or sponsor, stepping up to the imposing glass doors of the European Medicines Agency, the EMA. She's carrying this briefcase, right? And it's just stuffed with years of clinical trial data. In her mind, and frankly in the minds of the general public, walking through those doors represents the ultimate finish line. But as this comprehensive review of 96 original studies reveals, that perception is actually fundamentally flawed.
Now, I want you to really think about this for a second. What if drug approval isn't actually a finish line, but just the starting line? We've all been kind of conditioned to think that when a regulatory body like the EMA gives a drug the green light, that's it. End of the story. It's proven, it's perfect, we're done here. But as we'll see, the data shows us a very different reality. For a lot of our most innovative therapies, arriving at the EMA is not the end of a long journey at all. It's literally just the beginning of a highly complex, continuous evidence life cycle.
All right, Section 1, the regulatory starting line, arriving at the EMA. So let's picture our protagonist pushing through the doors into that massive EMA lobby. Let's say the drug in her briefcase is an ATMP, an advanced therapy medicinal product. We're talking about the absolute cutting-edge stuff here. Innovative therapies based on genes, cells, or tissues. It's crucial to set the stage here because regulating a living cell therapy or a sophisticated gene editing tool requires an entirely different evidentiary standard than, say, regulating your standard chemical pill.
And this brilliantly illustrates a really harsh reality waiting for her in that lobby. Look at the academic and small company sponsors. There were 318 ATMP clinical trials registered in the Udractus database. That's a lot of innovation. Yet the number of successful certifications for these smaller players was astonishingly low. It highlights this brutal translational gap. While the big pharmaceutical companies have the massive infrastructure needed to navigate all this, a lot of brilliant life-saving therapies from smaller sponsors just get stuck right here in the lobby. They simply can't cross the threshold into certification because the sheer weight of the evidentiary demands is just too high.
Moving on to Section 2, the front desk, conditional pathways and residual uncertainty.
Okay, so our sponsor gets to the front desk, but she doesn't get full permanent access. Instead, she gets a temporary badge. This symbolizes expedited and conditional authorization. Why temporary? Well, in one expedited cohort, a staggering 90% of products were authorized based merely on surrogate endpoints. Now, a quick refresher. A surrogate endpoint is an indirect measure. Think shrinking a tumor on a scan, or altering a specific biomarker in the blood, rather than a direct clinical outcome, like how long a patient actually lives or how they actually feel day to day.
But here is the real kicker, the stark reality of that temporary badge. None of those surrogate endpoints were actually validated. Seriously, let that sink in for a minute. Regulatory access was granted based on biological markers that hadn't yet been definitively proven to translate into actual long-term patient survival or improved quality of life. This right here is the very definition of residual uncertainty. It's a massive compromise that regulators actively choose to make in order to accelerate access to potentially life-saving drugs.
You see this dynamic play out all the time in oncology. Check this out. At the time of EMA approval, only 35% of cancer medicines actually showed a demonstrated survival benefit. Think about that. That means a massive 65%, nearly 2/3, hit the market lacking clear evidence that they actually extend a patient's life. So patients and doctors are popping champagne, celebrating an approval, but a huge portion of those crucial drugs are entering clinics without definitive proof of the one single metric that matters most to a terminal patient.
So the crucial point here is the massive tension between these two realities. On the left side, you've got this immense public and clinical demand for expedited access, right? We need to get innovative drugs to patients with high unmet need conditions faster. But on the right side, we see the inevitable trade-off, severe evidence gaps. When you expedite access, you are explicitly accepting high residual uncertainty, a lack of overall survival data, and ultimately, as the review points out, less favorable reimbursement outcomes. Health systems understandably demand hard proof before they're willing to pay those high prices.
Let's map out what this actual life cycle sequence looks like. Getting past that front desk with a temporary badge, that's really only step 2. A surrogate endpoint shows some early promise, which leads to conditional authorization. But then comes the really hard part. Step 3, mandatory post-marketing commitments. And step 4, the rigorous review of real-world evidence.
That initial approval is absolutely not a victory lap. It's a binding contract. It's a promise to go back out there and finish proving the drug actually works in the messy, real world.
Which brings us to Section 3, the auditorium, post-authorization and real-world evidence. So imagine our protagonist is now standing at a podium in a huge auditorium. She's delivering this high-stakes speech to prove her drug deserves permanent access. You'd think real-world data would easily prove her case, right? Well, not exactly. While 39.9% of marketing applications included real-world evidence, that evidence supported final efficacy decisions in only 22% of cases. There is a massive, massive drop-off between just submitting real-world data and regulators actually trusting it enough to make a definitive ruling on efficacy.
And the reason for that drop-off is perfectly captured by the researchers in this quote. RWE's regulatory influence remains constrained by missing data, representativeness, and study quality. It makes total sense, right? When you move from a super tightly controlled clinical trial into the messy reality of an everyday hospital clinic, data gets lost, patient populations are incredibly diverse, and the rigor of the studies just naturally drops. The EMA scrutinizes this post-authorization data heavily before granting any sort of permanent validation. They demand precision, and they don't always get it. Now, what's really interesting here is that when post-approval monitoring is done right, it genuinely works. Like, take nusinersen for spinal muscular atrophy. Real-world data proves significant motor score improvements out in the wild. Or at the Checkmate 171 trial, where the overall survival benefit of nivolumab was successfully confirmed post-approval. And of course, the COVID-19 vaccines. Rigorous safety tracking actively identified incredibly rare signals like Guillain-Barré syndrome that simply couldn't be caught in those initial trials. Active surveillance actively resolves those earlier evidence gaps. It's a system working exactly as intended.
But we really have to address the persistent uncertainty that kind of plagues the whole system. By year 3, after getting that conditional authorization, nearly 28.4% of therapies with initially ambiguous profiles still lack positive survival information. And it gets worse. By year 5, 30% of mandatory post-marketing requirements are delayed. So our protagonist is essentially stuck. She's repeatedly returning to that podium year after year, just struggling to fulfill the promises she made on day 0.
Section 4, a continuous evidence life cycle.
As our protagonist finally steps off that podium, it hits us. She's not leaving the building. Her work is completely ongoing. And honestly, that is the absolute core takeaway here for every clinician, payer, and developer. You have to treat EMA approval as a starting point for ongoing benefit-risk reassessment, not some confirmation of mature value. Regulatory acceptability simply does not equal demonstrated long-term clinical value. We have to adjust our expectations and recognize that true medical innovation requires patience, continuous monitoring, and a willingness to constantly revise our understanding as that real-world data trickles in.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question. Are we prepared to treat drug approval as a promise rather than a guarantee? The next time you hear about a major, supposedly game-changing breakthrough hitting the market, remember that woman with a temporary badge. The drug has been given a chance to prove itself, sure, but the true test of its value, that has literally just begun. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions, and I'll catch you next time.